All right, here we go. Hey, thanks for listening to the Welding Tips and Tricks podcast. I'm here with Roy Crumrine.
How's it going?
Jonathan Lewis.
Hello, everyone.
And today we have a special return guest. It's Alex Brown, also known as Caveman Welder on Instagram. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing fabulous. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing real good. I got to apologize right now. Right when we're sitting here, I just read a comment on my YouTube channel that put me in a bad place. So I'm kind of gathering my composure right here as I speak. But you think you grow thick skin, and then somebody gets right under it, you know?
Let us know what video, and we'll all go flame them.
No. Anyway, Alex Brown. If anybody's on Instagram, he's Caveman Welder on Instagram. We've had him on the podcast before. If you've read Alex's posts, you know that he is a very thoughtful poster. Like, his posts are like little nuggets of gold. You know, he goes to great lengths to try to post value on the post. Like, he doesn't just give a shot of a pretty weld. It's how he did it, maybe even how he held his hands or how he propped or the pulse settings and this, that, and the other. So we've seen him do several posts over the last year. It's about a year since we had him on the podcast, using pulse MIG settings, using a Miller 350P. Is that correct?
Yep.
And so that's sort of I have a comparable machine. It's a Lincoln 350 MP. But it's got pulse MIG parameters on it and everything, and I'm very interested in picking Alex's brain today on pulse parameters, pulse MIG settings, applications, things like that, and hopefully try to clear up a few misunderstandings on what is pulse MIG. So I'll start the question. I'll start off, Alex, by asking, like, what are the typical applications where you would use pulse MIG?
Well, typically on thicker materials, like you can do thinner stuff, but it really starts to shine when you get up over, say, 400 inches a minute, where you get that. Even 400 can be kind of low. 035 wires is what I run as well. But once you get up around like 450, 500, 550, it starts to kind of really scream at you. And you can see the end of the wire come off as a nice needle. I don't know. I use it for pretty much all my steel welding, just because I've gotten used to it, and I can hardly stand short arc anymore. I would tell people, the difference to me is kind of like comparing a 60-10 versus a 70-18, where the 60-10 is just real violent, and it's sparky and smoky, and not that 70-18 isn't smoky, but it's just, you can see everything. It goes in real smooth. You see the puddle real well. It's just a lot easier. I don't know, just to see everything, I guess.
Yeah, I think that for the beginner, for somebody that's never used pulse MIG before, we need to sort of set a baseline and explain what it is, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. Like, when you think of pulse TIG, you're seeing a high amperage pulse, and then it backs off to a low amperage pulse. So there's a definite flicker, like 1 pulse a second or 1.5 pulses a second. And then you can crank it up to whatever, 500 pulses a second too. But it's a very different thing with MIG welding. So and I think there's reasons, part of the reason there's a misunderstanding. I do think there's some import machines out there that tout the pulse MIG settings for welding on, like, sheet metal and stuff, and I think that's a whole different thing. Like, maybe they are superimposing some pulse current over that short circuit MIG, but my understanding of pulse MIG, it's a variation of the spray transfer mode, spray arc, which is a super hot mode. Like, that's like, you can pretty much only weld in flat and horizontal, and you can do overhead if you're careful, but you're not going to have much success usually going out of position vertical uphill with spray, but you can with pulse spray. It sort of modifies it, and it's a very fast electric circuit that pinches that wire droplet off at just the right time. but it allows you to weld with. It's a modification of spray transfer, but allows you to go all position. Would you agree with that, or you have something to add to that?
Yeah, majority of what I do, I'm able to position it to where all my work is pretty much horizontal and some overhead. Just because we have a forklift, and if you're going to do a whole lot of welding, it's worthwhile to prop it to where everything's horizontal and easy to do. And overhead is very similar to horizontal, and of course flat's easy. But vertical, I have like pretty much no experience doing vertical, or at least I've never had any great luck going vertical up. And so actually that was one thing I was going to ask Jonathan about, was vertical. I don't know if you want to get into that now or later, but I've never had good luck going vertical up. I have run vertical down, and if you get up into like 1/4 inch, like just like a T joint, vertical down, it just lays in there like a braze joint, really. There's no depth of fusion. But yeah, mostly I try to make it to where I can do everything horizontal or flat, or slight uphill or slight downhill.
Wow, to get you more exposed to vertical up, man.
Yeah, I've tried like a real high feed, like a wire feed, and try to smoke it in real hot where it punches in and wets out, but it always just falls out on me. And then if I go too cold, first of all, it doesn't really feel right to be welding real cold, down in like the 300s. And if I do go down in that, it kind of just crowns up the center and doesn't like to lay in flat.
In my experience, anyway, it's sort of like short circuit in that if you don't do some manipulation, it will crown up, on a vertical up fillet weld.
Right.
But I do kind of prefer it to short circuit for that. I'm kind of getting over short circuit like you. I've welded with it for many years and fabricated and built, short production runs, parts and everything. But I'm trying to keep an open mind, learn new process, kind of like getting plugged in with J.D. Brewer. He's all about the dual shield flux core, and that's been sort of an eye opener for me, because I always thought that it was pretty much just strictly a heavy duty industrial construction process for super heavy weldments, but he almost uses it in situations where a lot of people would use short circuit, but he's burning in there a lot better, and with very minimal cleanup too with the dual shield. But I think that the pulse spray can be a definite alternative to dual shield for somebody that, where parts are going to be painted afterwards and they just don't want any cleanup or just super minimal cleanup. It's definitely a better alternative than short circuit for structural stuff. And because it's a variation of the spray transfer, you can benefit from pre-qualified procedures and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so clean, There's like the last couple major MIG jobs I had, it was all pulse, and like once in a while, if you're like when you're tacking or maybe starting a bead, you might get like a dingleberry that sticks, but once you're kind of dialed in and you're going, it's like there's absolutely no little spatter that sticks, and it doesn't even really spark. Like there's no sparks coming off, so it's like all the wire is going into the pool, whereas short circuit, it's every little spark and every little dingleberry is metal that didn't get into the weld. It's like a lot less efficient, I think.
That's a good point. You can tell that a lot, but it's kind of like a carburetor that's really tuned well, a really efficient burn. Right. If you're doing short circuit MIG and you've got your parameters a little bit out of whack and you got crazy spatter, well, that's just a lot of wasted metal, a lot of wasted energy. It's not an efficient burn. It may be a good weld, but you got a lot of byproducts sticking all around, like spatter and whatnot. Do you have if you were to say off the top of your head, you're welding on 1/4 or 3/8 inch thick steel, you walk up to a friend's 350p Miller machine, could you, what would you set it at with your sweet spot pulse settings for a job?
I usually leave the arc length at 55, which is kind of right in the middle range. I think it goes from 0 to 99. So I like it right around anywhere 50 to 60, and that'll change with the job at hand. And the sharpness setting, which sort of necks down the droplet pattern, I guess. It kind of tightens up where the droplets go, kind of like a less or more wetting. I set that around 25, anywhere from 20 to 40. So it's a pretty big range, and you have to get some hours before you can tell the difference. But once if you're using one setting for a while and then you change it a little bit, then you can definitely see the changes it makes. There's like for 3/8 or quarter inch, I'm up over maybe 480 to anywhere up to close to 600, depending on like a first pass on like a 3/8 would probably be, 3/8 would probably only be a single pass a lot of times, but like in a first pass, I'd probably be around like 570, 580 on the wire speed with a 035 wire. And
it's cooking in there pretty good. That's quite a bit of wire.
Yeah. It's hauling. And I know that wire speed kind of changes things. Like it'll change the amount of amperage it takes to melt it off. So all of my recommendations are kind of based on using a 035, which is actually a setting in the machine. You change from 035 to 045 to like all the way up to 16th, I think. I don't know if it goes any higher.
I was doing a little reading on Pulse MIG, and it just depends on the source. There are people who tout the Pulse MIG, the fact that you can use 045 wire and get a whole lot of range out of it, and maybe just standardize on 045 wire. But there are people that like to use smaller wire. I just run higher wire feed speeds. You got that in short circuit too. I remember I used to work for a guy. I did some moonlighting from moonlit. I did some moonlighting, working on the side for a guy, and he was just all about anything that could be MIG'd. He wanted MIG'd, and he had 045 wire on this L-Tech like Lindy MIG welder, and it would run good if you had everything set right and your gun angles right and everything. But man, you get in an odd angle or a little bit of different stick out, and you got this huge spatter all over the place. But I'm looking at a joint that's on your Instagram page here, and there is not even a hint of spatter on this thing. And that's the benefit, really. You can use either 035, you could do the same thing probably with 045, but like you said, if you don't even see any spatter coming off the weld in your lens, then it's a efficient burn and things are going well, right?
Yeah, that's what I think. And like these, we call them overshots, the big tubular assemblies. I have a photo on my Instagram of me standing next to it. Actually, Jody, I think you put it in the video where you're talking about my pulse setting. Mm-hmm. The big tubular 1/8" rolled sheet with the 3/8 ring and a 1/4 inch like flange on the top with some lifting eyes. And those things took about 800 inches of weld. So 60 something feet of weld. And I literally, there was like no cleanup. I literally, there were maybe a couple of spots where I had to get a chisel, like on a tack or something, and knock a BB off. But other than that, it's like brush it with your glove and ship it. Yeah.
And that is a benefit, especially if you're doing a lot of welding, either a lot of parts on a production run or just a lot of inches of weld. If you can not even have to hardly spend any time with cleanup and the hammer and chisel or a needle gun or whatever it is that you use to remove spatter with, you move on to the next thing and make more money that way.
Yeah. And actually the other major job, I had 27 of those overshots to build, which was a lot of welding. And, but the last major job I had was this, dozer rake for the Forest Service, which is like a front rake attachment for a cat dozer. That thing had something like 140 feet of weld just in like three bead caps and 2 bead caps. And we went off the original part, which we made our drawings from, and that was all dual shield welded. And that was kind of a consideration, was doing dual shield, but having to chip the slag off every pass, off little 6-inch runs, and a 3-bead cap takes 6 runs. So all that cleanup, all that slag chipping was it's kind of why I decided to stick with with just a pulse arc.
Yeah, well, different strokes. It depends on the application, definitely.
So let me ask you, why did you choose 035 so much? Because we stick with, for the most part, 045, and I've welded, sheet metal up to super thick items with it. What is your reasoning, I guess, is behind the 035 versus 045 or 052 or anything else?
Well, the main reason is just because that's what I've always used. I've never 045 or 16th or anything. I have used smaller, not in the Miller-Matic, but in little wimpier machines. I don't know. The 035 seems to have a bigger range, wider range of materials. You can go down real thin, like you're saying you do with 045, up to super thick and just crank up the wire.
Right.
And I know that guys will say that 045 kind of wears your machine less because everything kind of slows down a little bit in the spool and the feeders and stuff, but I don't know. Main reason is just because that's what I've always used. That's what I've kind of dialed in.
You need to throw some 45 in that thing and let that thing. What's that saying that Joel said? Let the big dog eat.
I don't know. You'd be surprised. You can lay down the metal with the 035. You get it
right. You can. I mean, you eventually run out of range and wire feed speed, with the 035, just like you run out of range with anything. But you're right that 035 seems to do good for the low end of things. I mean, I'm talking thin sheet metal type pulse MIG welding. But we went into a company doing a time study to show them the benefits of pulse and mainly moving up from 035 to 045, and did the full 9 yards of showing them, 045 is cheaper also, just by buying it per pound. And
right.
They decided not to switch because their guys were pretty much set in their ways. But it was just amazing that you could show them all that, and it's like, no, we're gonna stick with 035, which is fine, whatever. It's teach their own. I'm not paying their bills, but I've just wondered why different people pick with different things, and 045 seems to work. I mean, the thinnest I generally weld with the 350 MP is 1/8 inch, give or take. So I mean, it does that extremely well. Wow. And then, of course, it does the thicker stuff very really well also.
Yeah. And I actually considered for the last job, that the dozer rake to either step up to 045 or maybe try a metal core. And I got with my local weld supply guy, and he printed out some charts, and we kind of went over deposition rates and stuff like that within amperage ranges, and we kind of just decided to stick with what we're used to.
Right. I mean, some of it comes back to you don't want to retrain. I mean, you're just one guy, but you don't want to retrain. I think it was close to a dozen guys in that shop. Yeah. And so it would be a pain to switch to metal core or 045. I mean, plus you got the procedure worries if you're a shop that follows code. So to each their own.
Yeah, that was kind of another thing because on the overshot job, the big tubular things, I had to make up a WPS and get myself qualified to that, and that was for pulse arc and spray arc, and the wire size was 035. So I figured, that would cover me for any jobs that came after it, I suppose.
Right. And you can always do another PQR and WPS, and for 045 or 052, and you'd be set. Wouldn't be a bad idea to get it. I mean, but then again, it just depends on what you're doing or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, here's a crazy little story. I attended the Lincoln Advanced Motorsports class a few years ago, and one of the guys running the class was telling me that one of the race teams, they had a 350 MP Lincoln, and they wanted to run everything on 025 because they didn't want to change ever. They didn't want to have to change sizes of wire ever. So they wanted settings for everything using 025. And pretty crazy because you're going to be up around 700, 750 on the wire feed speed sometimes on that, on your thicker stuff. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but that's what the team wanted. It's like, we don't want to change wire, and we want to be able to weld the thinnest sheet metal to the thickest stuff we weld, one size wire. That's it. What are we going to do? And well, I guess you can run this, and and so you got this big monster machine with a 10-pound spool on it of 025.
That's crazy.
I know.
One another. I mean, of course, you're getting into some details here, but another thing to consider too, when you're up at 700 inches a minute, think about it. How much are you wearing out your contact tip at 700 inches a minute versus 400 inches a minute? The time that your actual arc hours for welding, in theory, anyways, you would wear out those smaller diameters faster than your larger diameters, but not always. I mean, I'm sure there's instances out there maybe that are a little bit different, but there's just a lot of things to consider. Like you said, wear and tear on your machine, wear and tear on your gun, wear and tear on everything.
It's just kind of like, it was silly to me to hear that, because it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't you just set this 350 MP up with 035 or 045 and just grab a 115 volt MIG with the 025, to just come and weld some sheet metal or something. You don't have to do it all with this 350. I don't know. Everybody's got a different plan, different ideas, and not wrong. It's just if they can make it work, more power to them. But it just seemed a little off the cuff to me.
Mm-hmm. No, each their own. Well, Alex, you told me beforehand you had some questions, and you mentioned about vertical up. I don't know what direction we want to specifically go with this topic, but
yeah, anything you can offer for vertical up, I'm all ears.
Cool. Well, the first thing I would definitely share, no matter which position you're in, is cleanliness is next to godliness, especially when it comes to pulse. If you don't get that mill, we talked about this before in past podcasts, but if you don't get that mill scale off there, you are going to have, more than likely, you're going to have problems with undercut when that pulse hits that, and it just creates an undercut problem there. It's just, you definitely want to clean it to the best of your ability. With that said, I do understand that there are those listening to this that will not be allowed to clean it. And so, you can manipulate, for the Lincoln, it's called trim. It adjusts the width of your bead, the arc comb, and the arc length all in one. And you can adjust that, and that'll help a little bit, but still you're not going to get around having a clean base metal. That's going to be the first key right there. And really, pulse MIG vertical up, or GMAWP, as it's properly called, is basically the same as the 7018, really. You're holding the size just like you are the 7018, going quickly across the middle and, carrying that up all the way. I'll give one of my sweet spots anyway for 045 on the Lincoln 350 MP. Their version of the arc cone width, like I said, is called trim. And so generally I set the trim for vertical up on pretty much anything. I don't go beyond a single, pass, which would probably equal out to be 3/4 of an inch wide, generally anyway. Generally I'm in the 0.96 to 98 range. And the wire feed speed is generally in the 220 to 240, sometimes 260 if I'm really feeling froggy, which I think equates to around 150 amps, if I remember correctly. And that's booking. You don't want to hang around and sing a song there, but you definitely want to book and go up. But man, the best way I can explain it is do it like a 7018. Hold those sides in, let it fill in, and then move on to the other side. One of the things I think is a benefit of pulse MIG is it seems like, although I guess you could say the same with 7018, but it seems like you're just like hanging out there. It's kind of like the Matrix, where you're just kind of welding there, waiting for it to fill up, and as soon as you see it get to be filled up, you like move on to the next side. Then you're waiting for it to fill up and move on to the next side, and then moving as quickly as you can. One of the things I did see as a negative to vertical up pulse is if you go obviously too slow, you're just dumping that heat in there. And I have witnessed quite a few weld tests that fail because of way too much heat input, and makes that plate brittle and it just snaps when they go to bend it. But clean it, get that thing dialed in, is humming like a bee, and just climb.
Okay. Yeah, I've got the cleanliness down. I mean, I know that much. And yes, if you're welding a part, like just straight off a plasma table, just hot rolled, hot scale on there, yeah, it makes a huge difference, because instead of just having that, that bare wire go to bare steel, it's having to cut out, dig through that scale. You have to go a little slower to watch your toes. That way they kind of fill in and wet out that undercut. And of course you get a whole lot more slag of, just the glass island. But yeah, the cleanliness I totally get.
Right. One thing I've noticed too is, you brought up, I don't know if I ever actually posted it, but I actually did. It was on a part. I cleaned one side of it, like the right side of it, cleaned it down to bright shiny metal, and then on the other side was, pretty thick, scale on there where it wasn't cleaned at all, and it's the red scale. It seems to be really, really thick and nasty. And I did a vertical up, and on the clean side, obviously, it was really, really pretty. But the other side, it was pretty iffy. I mean, you could tell that I should have hung out a little bit longer on that left side or whatever but that scale just kicks your butt and does not help you whatsoever. Another thing that you will see in vertical up is you will see that scale break off, and obviously it melts at a much higher temperature, and it's like floating around in there for a second and just creates havoc on what you're trying to do. And from what I've seen, a lot of times it'll keep that center of your weld out. It won't be like a flat it'll just be really protruded, and that really obviously isn't always acceptable for everything.
Like the center of the bead is crowned.
Right. It seems to be that way anyway. I think that probably depends on the thickness of the scale on the plate too, and what you're actually doing. But I also keep I guess I skipped the detail there. I try to keep a decently close contact to work distance, probably around the half-inch range. Again, it depends on where my settings are and what wires that I'm using. But for 045, I'm going to say that in the half-inch range on that. And I'm trying to be as straight on to the plate as I can. Kind of like you want to do in theory with 7018. You want to hold it 90 degrees to the plate. I try to do the same thing with the Pulse MIG, but, you find yourself walking, especially as you get closer to the top of the plate. Same with 7018 also. What about you, Jody? What do you think about? You got anything to add to that?
I kind of fall back on the same techniques that I would using short circuit MIG going vertical up. I'll either do a inverted V or a series of triangles, but I definitely have noticed that, like you said, there's just like a time stops for a second when you're filling in at the toes. You got to pause there just the right amount and then scoot over to the other side. It brings up two things, though, interesting that you were just talking about. There is such a difference in the thickness of mill scale type coatings. I'm working on a video with JD, and so there's some box tubing. It's rectangular tubing, and that's got a very different level of mill scale than, say, a piece of 1-inch hot rolled plate. You know what I mean? Box tubing seems like you could almost buff off the mill scale with a wire wheel, and that 1-inch plate is a super thick mill scale coating usually. It's different sometimes. It'll load up a wheel. You really almost got to put a hard rock on there to get it off, whereas the box tubing, you could, like I said, it almost comes off with a wire brush. So I know in dual shield flux core, you almost don't have to clean the box tubing. You can just go, with having that flux on there and everything. But if you were to want to get a nice clean weld with short arc or pulse spray MIG, you're definitely going to do better to clean everything, But there is a different level of a mill scale on different forms and shaped products.
Right, and it does affect very, very much. I mean, it's a pain. I did one project, 3-inch plate, and that mill scale on there was it was a nightmare to get off. But, if I didn't get it off, I think I used just regular spray transfer for most of that. Some of it was pulse, but a lot of it on the flats or just spray transfer, but still the same thing. With a regular spray transfer, you're still going to have the same problem with the toes of your weld with the undercut and everything. But, getting that mill scale off is super important in my opinion. Technically, it is, part of the codes, to remove all mill scale and get rid of that before you weld. But not every shop follows that, and not every shop's a code shop. So, you just take it for what it is. But I want to go back to the settings and talk about the differences. We've mentioned here, before we get too far along here, we've mentioned two different machines. We've mentioned the Miller 350P, and we've mentioned the Lincoln 350MP. And in reality, I think the settings for your arc cone width and your the arc cone width is a little bit different on the Miller versus the Lincoln. Like I said, on the trim, the wire feed speed is a wire feed speed. And on those machines, you can't go in, to my knowledge anyway, you can't go in and actually change the peak current and the background current on those. Some of the other machines, you can. You can go in there. Basically, it's like tweaking the pulse on a TIG. You can go and change your peaks, your peak times, and all that stuff. Am I right on that, Alex? Can you change all that on the 350P?
All that I can change is what you're calling trim is what Miller calls sharp.
Okay.
That's a 0 to 50, where 0 is it like really fans out, and then 50 is where it's really sharp.
Okay, so the Miller is backwards of the Lincoln then, because you start off, when you first turn the machine on, you got 1.00, and I'm not sure what the values actually represent to translate into volts and everything, and what it means beyond trim. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on that at all, but it's the opposite. If I go down to 80.80, it's really, really sharp, where the cone sucks itself in. Kind of like a high frequency on TIG, it sucks it in, and of course you go the other way and it widens the cone. I have got several messages about this, and I'm sure you have, you too, Jody, about the confusion on the 350P versus the 350MP on the trim and the sharp on there. So just wanted to clear that up. On there, I do know Miller, and I'm sure Lincoln, I know Fronius does. They all have their trademark names where you can go in and change the period of a hertz or the period of a frequency there, and where you change the peak current, the background current, the dwell, the overshoot on the pulse settings there. And of course, that's one of the benefits of their pulse. But I think, as far as I know, you can't mess with that on these lower, I guess we want to call them lower end machines. I mean, they're great machines, but so that gets rid of some confusion right there too. So you're not in there having a beginner start playing with your frequencies and everything. I think since it's all synergic, if I remember correctly, it adjusts to a certain value in the machine. So if I turn the wire feed speed up, I'm sure Miller and Lincoln have something figured out that 500 inches a minute, this is your ideal frequency for this trim or whatever it is. At least that'd be my guess anyway, since you can't adjust it.
That'd be my guess too. It would get kind of complicated when you're talking about those kind of pulse settings because they happen so quickly. And I would think a lot of that is just built in and then kind of ramps up, sort of a default setting as according to wire feed speed. That's my guess anyway.
You can definitely hear it when you turn the wire feed speed up. Your frequency increases drastically. So it's got to be something they have figured out.
Yeah. I think it probably would cause them a lot of customer support nightmares if they allowed you to get in there and tweak every individual parameter, on Pulse MIG, because it is pretty complicated.
Yeah, I played with a Fronius once for about 6 months, playing with their pulse settings, and you could go in that machine and you can play with the peak currents and the background currents and the dwell time and all the other names that I can't remember. Anyways, but you almost got to have a PhD kind of a thing to understand what some of that is, and it's not easy to find either. So
yeah. So Alex, I'm noticing most of the posts that I see where you're doing pulse MIG, you're using 9010 or 90 argon 10 CO2. Have you ever experimented with any other blends, or are you pretty much camping out on that?
Well, I have done it with the C25, and just because back when I was kind of ignorant to the difference it makes, but I have not tried any of the different, like 98.2 or 85.15.
Mm-hmm.
But I can definitely tell you that it makes a big difference going from 75 to 90. The 75 is a lot more violent and kind of raspy.
Mm-hmm.
With that richer argon mixture, it kind of everything calms down. It's just a lot smoother.
Yeah, that's what I found. I pretty much use 9010 I've played around over the years. It's been a while with some of the other things, 95.5 argon CO2 and then 98.2 argon O2, oxygen. But 9010 seems to be a fairly versatile gas, and you can even, if you need to go back to short circuit, you can even do it with that. To me, it doesn't work as good as C25, but you can definitely make something happen with it, if you need to. I'm just curious if you'd mess with it, because there's so many options for gas, and the gas suppliers are promoting different, proprietary blends for this and that, and, I just wanted to get a little feedback if you'd tried some of the other blends.
Yeah, well, I'd imagine with the richer you get in your argon mix, the easier it is to find like your kind of Goldilocks zone where everything calms down. Whereas, kind of like in your videos, Jody, running like pure CO2 is a lot harder to kind of find that spot where it wants to run good.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that translates to these higher argon mixes where it's just, and so like a 90-10 or 85-15 is, I guess, just easier to kind of dial in.
Yeah. Physics-wise, and I'm no physicist, but, according to physics, there is a certain level of argon that you need to have to be even to enter into spray transfer, and it all depends on wire diameter. It depends on a lot of things, but the higher the argon, you can more easily enter into spray transfer. Theoretically, I think maybe you can get spray transfer on C25 in some instances, but it's not ideal. But 9010 seems to be a good blend, so it's not hard to hit, and it's not too tough to find settings with that gas. So I'm going to stick with that, and I'm going to get my 350 MP out of storage next week, hopefully. I just was texting JD, actually, we were just an hour ago talking about this, get it set up in his shop so he can start doing some pulse MIG, because he's a big believer in the dual shield flux core. I am too now after seeing what he does with it, but I think there's some cases where he would probably benefit by doing the pulse spray MIG in lieu of the dual shield flux core, and get a better product and still get the productivity out of it.
Right. I would honestly, on some of his applications, I would challenge him pulse spray versus his dual shield flux core. Maybe not on everything, but I would definitely challenge so far as the cleanliness of the weld, speed, travel speeds. 045 versus 045. I think we could have a nice little battle to figure out which one's better in different cases. I'm not saying that pulse MIG is best for everything, nor is dual shield flux core, but I think there are some applications where he could look at that and be like, that actually works pretty good,
Oh yeah, he'll be receptive to it if it proves itself out. I think it would make for an interesting comparison, like on a job if he gets in, we're doing 2 of something or enough linear inches of weld where we can compare and see which one is more productive. Because I guarantee if one's more productive, he'll go to it, because when you're in business for yourself and you're paying all the bills, you don't have any sacred cows. You know what I mean? You'll switch in a heartbeat if one of them will make you more money. And that's why he's all about the dual shield flux core, because, as far as he's not always comparing it to MIG either. He's comparing it to a portable job with stick or things like that, where you don't have to ever stop and change a stick rod out. You just keep going. Makes a big difference for him.
Right. I think, one of the downfalls, obviously, and we've already talked about that, of GMAWP or pulse MIG is, the fact that JD or anybody running dual shield flux core can just like fly if it's got a lot of mill scale on there within reason, where, with pulse, you're going to have to clean that up pretty good. But, tubing, pickled oil plate, stainless, aluminum. I guess now that's not dual. Well, I guess that is actually flux cord stuff too, not the aluminum. But anyways, you get into some of these other applications. I think they would probably. It'd be worth seeing, the difference, because like I said, I'm not going to say that it's better, because each person's application is completely different than the next guy. And so, for maybe his applications, dual shield flux core is just awesome. But, what an option that might be even better for him might be metal core, for some applications and vice versa. So It would be interesting to see some comparison videos there. One of the benefits I see over, some of the control that JD doesn't necessarily have is the arc cone. You can make that thing wide, and I think I need to explain that because I'm not sure if everyone listening understands that. The wider the higher you turn it up on a 350 MP or lower on a Miller, I guess it would be, the wider that cone will fan out. And so because of that, you can either lay it flat, like a well-bead flat, or you can really crown it up and shrink it down if you want it crowned up or whatever. Where the dual shield, yes, you can do that and control that a little bit with the voltage and wire feed speed also. But, where I can walk over to the 350 MP and I can just tweak my trim, and here you go. It's dialed in. Here's nice and tight. There's no undercut on the sides. Fly. Don't worry about chipping your stuff. If you want to do a comparison against that, obviously you got the lower heat input, in theory anyway, of pulse versus some of the dual shield. That can be mitigated by, faster travel speeds maybe with the dual shield. Lack of cleanup with the pulse, as we've already talked about, and just on and on and on. The theories of, and I'm not totally sold on this idea, but there is a theory out there. I know, Jody, you said you were reading up on this beforehand. There's a theory out there that you have less lack of fusions problems out there. I think that has to do with the operator, a lot of that, because I witnessed a company going through ASME 9 tests, and they were failing after failing for lack of fusion. And it was like, what in the world? And it was pulse. But was it the operator? Was it the settings? Who knows? But, that's another thing out there with the dual shield. Maybe it didn't get chipped very good. So you've got, discontinuity in there somehow, some way. So it'd be an interesting comparison, honestly.
Yeah, we're going to probably do some of those in the near future, because right now JD's got a Lincoln 256 power MIG and then a 210 MP power MIG, and in fact I'm working on a video right now, should post in a day or two, where he's posted stuff on his Instagram account already about it, where he's building this 60-foot long metal rack that goes in a factory somewhere. I don't know a whole lot about what it actually holds, but it's 60 foot long, and it's 3/16 wall thickness. It looks like something like, I didn't measure it, so it's like 3x6 rectangular box tubing primarily, with a lot of mounting flanges and things like that. And it's strictly all dual shield flux core. Well, he's got 100 welds on that thing. Would have been a great project to compare productivity of, like, say, metal core versus flux core versus pulse spray MIG. But we did it all. He did it all with dual shield. In fact, did it all with 035 dual shield, because of it just only being 3/16 thick, and because he had already several spools of 3/16, because he uses the small spools in the 210 MP. So, just grab one of those and throw in a 256, and it looks kind of funny, but everything works.
Right.
So, yeah, but there's a lot to be learned. There's all these factors like current density and travel speed and deposition rates and all that, but it did fine. It looked fine. It did fine. I did a cut and etch. I don't think I'm even going to post that, but it definitely was doing the job, getting in where it was supposed to get in. Like you were talking about trim on the pulse spray MIG, those flare bevel V type groove joints that you have when you weld square tubing, box tubing like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The rolled corner, you got that little gap and everything, and you need to get down in there. That's where that trim or cone or whatever setting really kind of can help you as far as a fan out or punch down in there, and that's a definite benefit. Whereas with the dual shield, you just do it, you just weld it.
Right. You're more, I don't want to say you're more limited, because I'm sure there's some people that say, well, I can do this, and maybe you can. But you can change so many things on there. And then like that example there, you're running 035. Well, you could have done everything with 045 and ran all the way down to your 16 gauge, and it would have been fine. But again, it just depends on what you want to do and who's doing it. Yeah.
Well, again, at the end of the day, right now, he doesn't have the capability of doing pulse spray, because he's got that 256 in there. That's why we're going to get that 350 MP set up in there in a week or so, and we'll be able to do some of these comparisons, and maybe we'll up his productivity a little bit. That'd be awesome. Everybody will learn something at the end of the day, and that's kind of what we're all about.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. An area that the 350 MP shined very well in was pulse on pulse. They had pulse on pulse. Mm-hmm. You're not getting into all the different settings and whatever on that, but just sticking with the fact that it's pulse, I was able to use 045. I think I was using 045 wire on that MIG welding 60 thou aluminum to thick and thin plates, which to me is amazing because, if you put that in a spool gun with regular spray transfer, the problems that most people are going to have, where I can really dial that thing in. I love it. I'll just be honest. I love the 350 MP with the pulse on pulse. I'm not saying it's the best machine out there in the world, but for the price point that thing costs with a push-pull gun and then run an 045 wire, or 364, whatever you want to call it, it's phenomenally great.
Yeah, when I was at that Lincoln class, I went over to the school area, and I don't remember the name of the instructor, but he was a really good instructor, and he really knew that 350 MP inside and out. And he gave me a rundown on it, and that was the most impressive thing, because he's like, all right, here, typical problem with aluminum, with spool guns is you got a cold start and a hot finish, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly.
You got a cold start, and then you got a crater crack at the finish. That's your typical problem with the spool gun aluminum, or what, the thermal conductivity aluminum. It's just, you got to heat it up, and then it really heats up if it's small at all, and then you're dealing with a crater at the end. So, it's got the ability for like a sort of a hot start, and then a crater fill at the end. Right. And then pulse on pulse, like you said, you can just drag it along, and then it'll dime in ripples. And he had a perfect way of demonstrating that, where he's like, okay, let me just show you. Let me just set up the standard way. And then, of course, you could see the distinct cold start and the distinct hot crater at the end. And he's like, now let me tweak these settings and let me run it. Now let me put the pulse on pulse and let me run it. And I'm like, my gosh, you should be on TV.
Yeah,
you should be on Welding Tips and Tricks. Yeah,
but that is another benefit of it. Mm-hmm. Is the hot start. And that works on both metal and regular mild steel and aluminum or stainless or whatever you're running in there. I use the crater fill mostly for carbon steel. Going back to carbon steel and leaving aluminum here for a second. For that carbon steel, I use the crater fill, or I think it's called crater or crater fill or something on the 350 MP. And usually I divide the value in half or around half so far as the wire feed speed, but no less than half of the wire feed speed, and the duration depends on the thickness of what I'm welding and how far I want to taper off. Do I want to let go and then let it sit for 2 seconds because I need to reach into somewhere, or what? And the trim I will turn down. I mean, it just depends on what it is, honestly. But I will turn the trim down too. My goal is when I'm doing the crater fill with Pulse MIG, is I want, when I let go of that thing for 0.4 of a second, usually it's 0.4 of a second, I'll just throw that out there, I want it to sound as good as it was running at 250 or 300 amps. So when I let go, it's, it fills it in. The most important thing, obviously, is to fill in the crater. But I don't want it spitting and sputtering and popping everywhere at the end. I mean, because that just, to me, that defeats the purpose of Pulse in the first place, or one of the purposes of Pulse in the first place. Now you got to clean all them stupid dingleberries up, and what was the point of that?
Really?
Do you get into using crater fill on the 350p, Alex?
Yeah, not for everything, but for some things, yes. And I typically set the duration like pretty much max, which I think is 5 seconds on the miller, and I drop it way down. Whereas you, like your wire speed, you say you'll go halfway. I usually go like pretty low because because what I found, the one application I can think of off the top of my head is those the lifting eyes on the tubular assemblies was at the end of each of those. If I didn't use the crater fill, what I would do is I would come and once I got to where I could see the bead kind of rolling over the corner, I would just hold it there for a couple of seconds and let off, and suddenly let off without the crater fill. And you can see it as it solidifies, which takes, on thicker stuff, it's pretty quick, but say it takes a second, you can see the grains all come into their solidified state. And then you see a tiny little shrinkage crack right at the crater dot. So yeah, I tried like a max, like 5 second down slope, and I went all the way down to like 250 or something on the wire speed, which is really low. And that was enough to get me away from getting that little crater crack. It's like anything higher than that, I would still get it. And I would, either kind of sand it off or file it out.
Yeah, I guess it depends on again, it goes back to the application then, really. And of course you're using you're using 035 or I'm using 045, and I guess it just depends on what it is. It's interesting though. I'm trying to think back of some exact settings. I mean, I don't remember exact settings. My guess is I think at the vertical up, I do use it on vertical up too. That helps to avoid that, the end on vertical up also. But I think I'm around 120, 150. Wire feet speed on the 0.4 of a second, and then I don't even remember the trim, 92, something like that, give or take 94. But just like you said, just enough to fill in that crater,
Right.
and that works. I mean, it works wonders. I will throw this out there also for those that do have a crater fill option on your machine. If you get tired or you're running in long beads, and you need to let go of the trigger every once in a blue moon. Set that thing at like 3 or 5 seconds at the exact setting that you are running when you got the trigger pulled, and it gives you a few seconds to readjust. There you go.
Yeah.
Keys
That's
to the
good.
Ferrari.
I believe it's a Lamborghini.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Another thing I'll do is like if I don't want to use a crater fill because I'm doing like just like a general fabrication thing. If it's like kind of thin stuff like 1/8 inch or 3/16, and you get to the end and you stop, you hold it for a moment to get a little bit of a riser head there, and then you stop and watch it solidify. And then at the moment it solidifies, just bump the trigger and give it a nice little button on there. And that usually will not leave a little like crater crack.
Right.
Which is like what I do. I'll just kind of bump it. Sometimes you got to bump it a few times to kind of fill it in.
Right. And there are theories on whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, which we're not going to get into today.
Good.
I've heard some good arguments either way, and it's like, yeah, I'll just stick with the crater fill option here.
What I think we should get into it. What's the?
Oh, dude, I don't remember exactly what some of them. One of them that I know offhand was one question I've seen come up is that part of your procedure? I'm like, what? What does that got to do with anything? The other one is molecular structure. What are you doing to that by blasting it there at the end? And I don't know if they're valid or not. I'm not saying that I believe them or don't believe them, but I don't see on some of that what's the difference if you're going to trigger it or you're going to use a crater fill. I mean, one difference is you're cutting the values in half or by 3/4 or whatever, but it's just an argument that I've seen some people that make more money than I do get into discussions over, and it's like, maybe you guys are going a little far, but maybe they're not. I don't know. So I want to touch on. I don't want us to forget this here. Is you hear all the time with pulse MIG. The two things that I hear brought up with it is benefits are the lack of spatter, or supposed to be a lack of spatter on a part. Therefore, you don't have to clean up the part after you get done, so there's no post-weld cleanup and everything. The other thing is lower heat inputs in your plates. So I guess the thing I want to bring up is twofold. I want to focus on less heat input. I guess I want to pick your guys' brain on, do you truly feel that in most applications it does get less heat input because of the pulse frequencies and the currents and everything that's going on there? Or do you feel that it's the opposite way, that it might put more heat input? And the reason I ask that is I've seen discussions, I've been involved in discussions with this, and I know some guys that are like, no, it's the other way around. Pulse just like pours the heat into there. And I did a project it's been a while back now, some hydraulic tanks. And I used Pulse MIG on that. It was like 1/8 inch material. I mean, it came out as beautifully as I could make them at that point in time. And they tried to do them with short circuit, and they warped. Not that it was a big deal, but that was one application. It was like, well, the pulse worked very well for this. So I don't know what you're talking about. What do you guys feel so far as heat input? Do you feel it's higher? Do you feel it's lower?
Jody?
Gosh, I would almost have to say it's higher than short circuit. But it honestly, unless it's mechanized welding, roll the dice.
Right.
Because the guy behind the helmet makes the difference, because it's the same as TIG welding. I mean, I've played around with a lot of TIG welding, pulsing with the machine, pulsing with the foot pedal, not pulsing. the results are always very surprising to me, because it really does make a difference on who's holding the torch, who's holding the gun. So sometimes it could be one way, sometimes it could be the other way.
I think it can because, okay, so let's take your peak current and, not even looking at the overshoot. So if you're shooting, as far as I understand that to be, if you're set at 200 amps, let's just say, the overshoot for a given amount of time will hit 220 or 250 amps before it goes, along its waveform and everything. So on a given inch, if the welding operator goes slower, I mean, for whatever reasons, wouldn't you say that he'd put more heat input into that part? I don't know. I've seen it several different ways. I've witnessed it from some guys I used to work with. One guy I worked with, he was an older guy. He liked pulse and everything. I'm not making fun of him whatsoever. But it just seemed like when he was using pulse spray, that parts would warp worse than if he used straight spray transfer. But again, I think it goes back to the operator, so I agree with you. Alec, your turn.
Well, I think at the same travel speed, same wire speed, I definitely think pulse puts less heat into the part than straight spray because of the undulation of the pulse current, where it goes from a spray transfer back to such a low current that it can't physically transfer a molten droplet. So I think at the same, everything controlled the same way, I think pulse puts less heat than spray.
Pound for pound, inch for inch, same travel speed. In theory, it's supposed to be that way. So I thought I'd just pick your guys' brain. And no necessarily wrong answer. With that said, it leads into your gun, actually. And that's what I kind of wanted to get into because I've seen guys like fry their guns when they switch to pulse welding. And I never could understand that. I did some research here before I got on here. It's no secret that I use water-cooled guns at work. They're my guns. I use them at work. And the reason, obviously, is to keep it cooler, keep the contact tips in there for a very long time and everything. But I did notice that when I switched from spray transfer to pulse, that, man, them guns, they get hot fast. Wow. And so the pulse actually derates a gun. Everything has a duty cycle. And so if you have a 100% duty cycle at 300 amps with CO2, gun, and you switch the pulse using whatever gas you're using, that derates the gun. And so what guys notice is, I think that's maybe one of the negative tastes in people's mouths, is it seems to burn up contact tips. It seems to burn up nozzles. Again, I'm not saying it's only the gun. I think it also goes back to welding operator error. But it does derate your gun. That's what I want to throw out there for everyone. So if you do switch to that, if you start playing with that, I notice it when I tack things. Like if you're just tacking a bunch of parts, that gun eats up pretty quick. I don't know if you guys notice it or not. But just remember that it does derate your gun. So you do want to step up to a bigger gun. Again, depending on how much you're welding, really.
What amperage is your gun?
The water-cooled guns or the air-cooled?
Both.
I think the air-cooled guns are 300 amp. I think I have 300 amp and 500 amps, and the water-cooled are 500 amp. I think they are, if I remember right. And they're, for what I'm doing, they're 100% duty cycle, so I'm never at 500 amps anyway. So I don't have to worry about burning those up.
So on your, say your air-cooled, you say it's how much? 300 amp?
I think the 300 amp, yeah.
So how does that handle long runs?
Not very well.
Yeah,
it'll handle them pretty good. I'll throw out some names out there. Like I use the Lincoln Magnum that comes with a 350 MP, and then I also use the Avacor Benzel guns. Both of them get hot. I'm not gonna lie. Both of them do get hot. Both of them work good, in their given ranges. But if you're doing stupid long runs, I'm talking like 15 feet, 20 feet runs that occasionally I do get into. Burning at 300, 350 amps, you'll get to the point to where you just can't hold the gun anymore. And that's the case with a lot of people that are listening. Where you switch to a water-cooled gun, obviously that problem pretty much goes away for the most part. But, the theory is that with just regular spray transfer, at the same given amount of feet, you can go farther, or the gun won't get as hot, or however you want to translate it. as it will with pulse spray transfer. All that I could find looking it up was they blame it on the overshoot, where it peaks out at the higher amperage there for that fraction of a second. That was all I could find. I'm not saying I have the answer, and if you do have the answer and you're listening to this, let us know, because I would like to know why that is. Why do guns derate when it switches to pulse transfer? I'm talking air-cooled guns here, not necessarily water-cooled. Water-cooled guns, I think, derate also, or they do derate also. But you're using a gun that's the same size that can handle more amperage anyway, so you're more than likely not going to reach its duty cycle anyway.
Yeah, I've had I use a Bernard 300 amp, it's air cooled, and the longest runs I've done are like 20 minutes, like 11 or 12 footers. Halfway into it, that handle is like up to like 140 degrees. And it's not like something that's going to burn you, but it's like you can't hold on to it for
right.
It's super uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's why I like water cooled, man. Once you use a water cooled gun, you don't want to go back. That's for sure. But anyway, I thought I'd throw that out there because, I like I said, going back to what I was saying earlier, I do think that there is a misconception. I mean, it's not really a misconception out there. Just be aware, because the guys are like, oh, that pulse is not a very good process because now I'm going through contact tips like crazy. Well, if you're using a regular copper contact tip and now you've just reduced your duty cycle of the gun and you pour more heat into that gun, or are you not wearing out your contact tip faster? So just be aware of that. Well, Roy, you've been quiet. Anything you want to add?
Nope. I've never ran pulse MIG, so can't really say anything.
Oh,
I think he'd like it, Roy.
Yeah, he'd like it. And he'd be good at it in about 10 minutes, I can promise you.
10 minutes. Probably like a minute. Be like, oh, okay, here's where it sets at. Especially if we set it up for him and be like, here you go. He dropped them dimes, or not dimes, I guess, but whatever. But he dropped down a bead. It was like, okay, I'm done.
Do you have the aluminum, the push-pull setup for your 350p, Alex?
No, I just got a spool gun.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I've only used it for a couple jobs. I'm not the guy to ask for spool gun stuff.
It's pretty rare I've never met a spool gun expert, to be honest. I mean, I went to a class. Actually, it wasn't even a class. It was like a focus group years ago, 20-something years ago. And there were a couple guys in there that seemed to be pretty up to speed on spool guns, but you just don't run into a spool gun cowboy very often. It's it's got to be somebody working in pretty much like a shipyard on aluminum boats or something marine related. It seems like it's definitely every little aspect of this industry that you got its niches, and you got your guys that dig into the details. And I'm looking forward to running in that guy who can give us some of those details, because I'm no expert, that's for sure. I'm wanting to learn.
No, can you? I mean, this might be a dumb question, but can you run pulse through the spool gun on the 350p?
Yeah, that's kind of the whole deal with the.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it works pretty good. I honestly, I've had more experience in another shop actually fabricating like big 12-foot by 16-foot extruded aluminum gas station signs that hang or that stand up like 70 feet in the air for like Shell stations, and that was all like short circuit. I didn't have a pulse capable machine, but that's like, actually Miller makes a Millermatic 350PA, I think, which is like dedicated for aluminum. So it's definitely a I don't know. It's a process that's common, I guess.
Right. Yeah. A friend of mine builds boats, has his own company, and I just helped him as a friend, and was going through different machines and whatnot. He settled on the aluminum version of the 350p, and he just got it, so I'm like anxious to hear how he likes it. And he's more of a beginner, I guess. I shouldn't say that when he owns the company. He don't do all the welding, but he helps out, get everything set up and everything. I'm anxious to see how he likes that. Unfortunately, he's never used a regular 350p, so it's kind of hard for him to give me a comparison of the two, but
right.
I've heard, a lot of benefits on the aluminum version versus the regular ones.
Jonathan, another question I had on, do you have any thoughts on like your run-in time for wire speed?
Honestly, I generally set it at 100 or leave it at 100. I'll ramp it up to 120, 140, but it just, yeah, I guess it depends on what I'm doing.
So you're going 120% of your feed.
Right.
So
to get in there and get it going and get the arc initiated. I've never really had a problem, to be honest with you, with at least mild steels with just leaving it at 100. There have been short occasions where I have turned it up. I think I leave it set at 120%. Now, if we go to aluminum, I'll definitely raise that up. Get that arc going faster.
Right.
I've only turned it down for one thing, and I don't remember exactly why or what it was. I had it around 90 or 85%, something to that effect. You can adjust that on the 350p too, correct?
Yes, that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mess with yours at all, or?
It's been set at 60%, which is low. So
okay.
I was just wondering, like, kind of the way I wrapped my head around it was, if you start off a little slow, then it gives you some time to let everything heat up before it's pumping out a whole bunch of wire. But now that you're saying you go high, I mean, that kind of makes sense, because then your amperage goes up.
Where the drawback can be is if you set it too high, obviously, then it like blows up right there at the beginning. You can have burn back, or you can have lack of fusion right there. There is the possibilities of that, but the chances are not. I guess I shouldn't say they're not likely, because I don't know what everybody's welding out there, and I don't want to mislead anybody. But 110, 120, I'm pretty sure that all my machines are set at 120 right now. Right. But I'm running 045, 052, and 16th. So that changes. I think that also changes the answer also.
Okay, so now how long does the run-in time last?
I don't know if you can adjust it on 350p. I think it's just...
You can't. That's why I'm wondering. If can you adjust it on your Lincoln?
I don't remember that I can, actually.
Okay, because I've always wondered, like, how long that actually lasts. I guess I could just set it stupid, like, low or high, and figure it out. But
I can find out while we...
I want to say you can adjust the time on the MP. I'm not 100% sure, because it's been a long time. Like, I've had mine just mothballed for over a year now.
You need to get that. I look forward to some more Pulse MIG videos, Jody. I think you only have one.
I know. I don't have much, but, like I said, that life throws you some curves, and
yeah,
I had to pull all my stuff out of that shop where I had set up, and that Lincoln was one of the machines, and it's at a friend's shop now, and it's just been sitting in the same spot for probably two years. Hadn't been run, and so I'm gonna set it up in JD's shop with push-pull aluminum, and we'll periodically, swap it out using some different stuff too. Do some pulse spray MIG, and we'll get into the push-pull aluminum too, and kind of dial that pulse on pulse stuff there. As just depends on what comes through the shop. I don't want to, it's hard to just do it for the heck of it. But when a job comes through, it'll prompt some videos there, hopefully.
I think once you get going on that, I don't think you're going to be doing much short arc anymore.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
It's so nice.
It's kind of like the old
dual shield flux core.
Yeah, maybe not. There's an old saying. If all you got's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so if you're just used to one thing, you just use it. But you open your mind up and you discover some different things, then you move on.
Yeah, one thing I could say is run hot, because I've kind of, when I was, as time's gone on, I've just run hotter and hotter, as even during the course of a job or a build. Like, I just keep turning it up. The Pulse really likes to run hot, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to keep that in mind.
Just hot.
I get up in there into the fives on the wire feed speed. See what happens.
Yeah.
One of my machines that has 35 in it. That was my last spool, and I think I was like 574, something like that, on my wire feed speed, and welding half-inch plate. So we're about in the same range anyway.
Yep.
I don't know, the Lincoln website's not working, so edit that question out. I honestly can't remember.
I have so many times. I've even put links to certain PDF guides and stuff on my website I find gold on the Lincoln website. Oh my gosh, this is so much information right here. And then they'll change it, and then the next month it's just a dead link, And I give up. They do it all the time.
Get into anything. It just like takes me back to I can see the Lincoln's review at the MP, but I can't. Every time I click view details, it takes me nowhere.
Yep.
Sorry, Alex, I don't honestly remember if I set the time on there. I'm trying to remember what it looks like. Was something else, Alex, you want to add?
No, I think we honestly just kind of scratched the surface. So I had some notes, and it's all good.
Well, it means we've got to have you on again.
That's right.
That'd be awesome.
Yep.
I just want to say, I don't know if we properly reintroduced Alex. This is a little late in the game to do it, but again, Caveman Welder on Instagram. His name is Alex Brown. TCR Performance, Team Caveman Racing, I believe. Isn't that what it stands for, Alex?
Yep.
And so, Alex is out in the Bakersfield, California area, working in a job shop, doing anything and everything, whether it's racing or not. A good hand, a good, thoughtful guy that thinks things through. That's why we had him on, because he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to not only pulse MIG, but lots of other things. So just a little wrap up there, just to give you a little, make sure everybody know where we're coming from with Alex.
I appreciate that, Jody. That's very nice of you to say.
Well, it wasn't a stretch. And I would like to have you on again. There's just a ton of things you could speak to. So stay tuned.
Yeah, if anybody has any specific pulse questions, I know over the course, every time we mention doing an episode on pulse, people are like, "Oh, I'd like to know about this or that," and we can't wait for that episode. Hopefully that this will lay a foundation. But if you have any specific questions, I'm not afraid to give you away. Anything that I know anyway. I'm sure Alex is the same way. So we'll be more than happy to revisit this. Email us, contact us, ask us a specific question, and we'll write down the notes, and who knows what we'll get into next. All right. We'd like to once again thank all those that support the podcast. We'd like to this month thank our top Patreons, Steve Funk, James Yoakum, Eric Rupel, Thord Goodmanson, No San Juan, Shane Gunnan, Rick Alato, Jacob Elder, Scott Silva, and House of Chop. If you would like to support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/Welding Tips and Tricks podcast.
And if you'd like to reach us here at the podcast, our email address is weldingtipsandtrickspodcast@gmail.com, and our phone number is 915-308-7024. I'm Roy Crumrun.
I'm Jody Collier.
Jonathan Lewis.
I'm Alex Brown. That's a wrap. And be sure to wrap those corners.
Yeah, wrap them corners.